to your weekly World Climate Change News Report. I'm your anchor, Irene Zelinsky. Our first story, global carbon level rises to an all-time high. The UK's Met Office predicted this year will reach one of the highest levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere ever, as Australia continues to battle devastating wildfires. This disaster alone is estimated to produce 1/5 of the increase in CO2 level. The Met Office warned that wildfires will become more and more frequent as the world gets hotter and hotter due to climate change. Our next story, climate change threatens human existence. Scientists are warning us that in 2020, the increase in carbon emissions will continue to boost climate change. They report that the amount of heat being put into the oceans is the equivalent to 3.6 billion atomic bomb explosions. Climate change is presently so threatening for human life that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has moved the symbolic doomsday clock to 100 seconds from midnight, which is the closest it has ever been to a simulated, figurative apocalypse. Our third story, the decline in the ability of tropical forests to absorb CO2. A new study shows that tropical rainforests may be losing their ability to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Rainforests in the Amazon, Indonesia, and Southeastern Asia are losing the ability to absorb CO2, but surprisingly, boreal forests are absorbing CO2 at a faster rate. Scientists suggest that carbon gains in the boreal forests could be attributed to the CO2 fertilization effect, where an increase in atmospheric CO2 causes plants to grow faster. Our next story, climate change discussed at the World Economic Forum. This year, the World Economic Forum meeting in Switzerland brought together 2,800 participants from over 118 countries, along with world's top leaders. The meeting discussed the newly discovered attention of the corporate sector towards key climate change issues, along with environmental risks and biodiversity loss, which largely influences the world economy. Also debated was the potential role that digital technology can have in the fight against climate change and strategies to achieve global sustainability goals. Next up, Germany launches the Green Central Asia Initiative. During a high-level conference in Berlin, the Green Central Asia Initiative was launched with the aim of supporting regional interaction between 5 Central Asian countries and Afghanistan. High-ranking officials from Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan took part in the conference. The German foreign minister, the host of the conference, pointed out how Central Asia and Afghanistan are suffering from tremendous climate change effects, and suggested that they should establish a cross-border cooperation. Our next story, the UN against climate change. If no further action is taken to prevent the coalition of climate crisis, the impact of climate change will jeopardize global stability in the near future. It has been estimated that in the upcoming years, the number of Indians directly affected by climate change will be over 600 million. Our next story, humanitarian crisis boosted by climate change. Currently, 2.3 million people in West Africa rely on humanitarian assistance to survive. 10% of the country is in severe distress, and the United Nations Humanitarian Agency reported that the country is being assaulted on all fronts. A number of factors, such as conflicts and fleeing refugees, have been boosted by climate change. While the climate crisis is increasing, the number of people in need, the Nigerian government, and the United Nations are developing strategies to deal with this crisis. Next up, New Jersey makes a first in the climate change fight. New Jersey's Governor Philip D. Murphy announced that New Jersey will become the very first state to legally require builders to take into account the impact of climate change in their projects. However, some prominent members of the Republican Party immediately expressed their discontent. Business and environmental leaders will be invited to participate in the rule writing process as part of an effort to gain as much support as possible. This process could result in the birth of an unprecedented resolution in the history of mitigation of climate change effects. Next up, the Climate Coalition of the Willing. Entering 2020 means being prepared to meet the Paris Agreement objectives and raise climate change awareness, but the geopolitical situation is not favorable at all. After the troubling outcomes of the 25th Conference of the Parties in Madrid this year, the general feeling of pessimism keeps growing, and the population is increasingly frustrated with their leadership. A quote-unquote climate coalition of the willing seems to be the best way to drive climate actions at every level. And finally, our last story, expansion of desertification in Europe. The Mediterranean, Central, and Eastern regions of Europe are being depleted by the expanding desertification. Climate change is reducing rainfalls, damaging soil health across the environment. Until now, this phenomenon was limited to Southern Europe, but it's now reaching central areas like Hungary, where in the national park, the lake has been reduced to dry banks. 1/3 of the Earth's surface is undergoing major transformations due to climate change effects and the extreme distribution of rainfalls this past year. This concludes this week's news. Please subscribe for more weekly world climate change news updates.